You are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis. Norman Richmond, Lisa Watson is on the buttons, and we just completed the Jazz On with T in Providence, and joining us on the line is Dr. Gerald Horne, and we are looking forward to having another illuminating discussion with Dr. Gerald Horne and your current book, The Capital of Slavery, is published by international publishers, and is there still an issue of getting that book in any countries, or is it the distribution coming like it should?
Well, my understanding is that if you go to the website of international publishers and put in the appropriate digits, you can receive the book. No, maybe I'm mistaken.
No, I'm speaking about getting it into bookstores, but I guess many people are not even going to bookstores anymore. I think we've talked about that on these airways before, correct?
That is true, although there has been something of a revival of late, at least in the United States of America, perhaps elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. All right. I guess the first question that I want to ask you is that Masai Ujiri is great basketball man. He led he brought a championship to the Toronto Raptors, and Masai Ujiri is he was born in England, but his background is Nigerian and Kenyan, and his wife is from Senegal, and he was recently ousted by the Toronto Raptors. I wanted to get your take on that situation.
Well, he had tremendous impact on the game of basketball. I think that you can draw a straight line from Masai's entrance into the upper levels of the executive suites of professional basketball and the likewise rise of athletes from continental Africa. Speaking of Joel Embiid of Cameroon and Pascal Siakam, formerly of the Raptors of Cameroon, and going all the way back, actually preceding Masai, would be the great Hakeem Olajuwon of Nigeria. And so that has led to the formation of the African Basketball League. The number one draft pick of the Phoenix Suns hails from South Sudan. You might recall that South Sudan contributed heavily to basketball. You might recall Luol Deng, who also hails from South Sudan, and since his retirement from the game after an illustrious career at Duke University and with the Chicago Bulls and LA Lakers, amongst others, he has become a kind of evangelist for professional basketball in South Sudan. And light of the fact that for whatever reason, there are a number of men of exceedingly great height hailing from that part of Africa, we can look forward in coming years to an influx of Sudanese, South Sudanese into professional basketball. And Masai Ujiri has a lot to do with that. That's part of his illustrious legacy.
You are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. Masai Ujiri, politically, I remember seeing him walking into a Raptors game next to, I think, President Barack Hussein Obama was no longer president at that particular time. What type of politics does Masai have in terms of? Do you know how he stands on, the politics in Nigeria, Kenya, and Africa?
I do not know. I would rely upon you for that kind of intelligence.
I think he is a company man. When I say a company man, I think he is. If you're in power, if you have some juice, I think he'll he'll stand with you, I believe. I've met him on a couple of occasions, and gave him, a lot of some of your stuff, as a matter of fact, and he used to take the stuff I gave him, and his assistant. He had a South Asian woman that was his assistant, and she would take most of the stuff I gave her. Now, whether or not it went into the trash can or in his hand, as Vladimir Ilyich Lenin might say, only Allah knows that.
I see.
Melinda, you have some questions. You're listening. You're muted. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're right. I am muted. Do we want to go to Tinubu in St. Lucia?
Well, the president of Nigeria, who is not known for being a Pan-Africanist. In fact, you may recall that shortly after entering office some months ago, he had threatened an invasion of his northern neighbor, speaking of Niger, because of regime change there. But in any case, in the last week or two, he has been sunning and funning in St. Lucia in the Caribbean. I would like to think that this has political implications, that it has implications for this upcoming tremendously important summit meeting to take place in Ethiopia in September 2025, the first face-to-face summit between the leaders of the African Union headquartered in Ethiopia and the leaders of CARICOM, the Caribbean community, which of course includes St. Lucia along with Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, etc. We shall see if that particular supposition proves to be accurate. But minimally, I would think that the fact that the president of Nigeria chooses to spend time in the Caribbean might set a trend for other Nigerians seeking to spend vacation time in the Caribbean. And I think that would be a welcome development, and it might make up for the shortfall with regard to U.S. nationals spending less time in the Caribbean, particularly in the aftermath of the COVID epidemic of a few years back. So in any case, we'll need to keep a close and careful eye on that particular trend.
Is Derek Walcott, isn't he from St. Lucia, Derek Walcott, the great writer?
Well, sure. And of course, for a long time, he was professor, if I'm not mistaken, at Boston University in Massachusetts. And he, of course, was also a playwright, passed away in 2017. Actually, to be appropriate, you may want to address him as Sir Derek Walcott.
Correct.
And of course, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1992 and was a celebrated man of letters.
And this CARICOM meeting is going to be held in Brussels and London. You have been encouraging Africans from North America, from the United States and Canada, to plug into that. Have you heard anyone other than yourself talk about putting forth that taking that position?
Well, first of all, let's split these issues. On the one hand, you've had CARICOM delegations in Brussels and London of late pressing the question of reparations. That should be divorced from the idea we're now talking about, which is this CARICOM African Union summit to take place in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. My understanding is that, well, at least I've received calls from the December 12th movement in New York City, which is an activist organization. I've been in touch with the activist community in Berkeley, Oakland, California. course, some of those activists were involved in pushing the state of California on the question of reparations. So we'll see what happens. I think that any turnout from North America will be significant and profound.
You are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. We're speaking with Dr. Gerald Horne, and we are raising funds for Black Power 96 and for in general and Diasporic Music in particular. And why should people donate to Black Power 96 in general and Diasporic Music in particular, sir?
Well, I think that any who are tuned in would instinctively realize and recognize why this is a valuable outlet for enlightenment, for education, a valuable outlet for music from the diaspora in particular. And that's why I've been a long-term supporter of diasporic music, and I would urge those in our audience who think likewise to emulate myself in supporting avidly and enthusiastically this particular outlet.
You have any more questions, Melinda?
Well, I'm just going to remind listeners where they can donate. Go to your computer, type in blackpower96.org/D, and if you're on the Cash App, it's Black Power 96. And if you want to call in your pledge, there's people on the phone. So go to your phone and dial 888-979-2796. Again, 1-888-979-2796. And I don't know if you want to go to Ujiri's new book, London Ujiri's new book.
Oh, no, you're going to have to brief me on that.
Okay, well then let's move on to the mini summit at the White House, the African mini summit at the White House.
Yes, well, this took place this past Wednesday. Leaders of West Africa, including Liberia, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania, Senegal, and Gabon. It was really quite insulting. Number one, a purpose of the meeting was to get these West African nations to accept deportees from the United States of America. That is to say, of late, the U.S. authorities have authorized the sending of undocumented workers to South Sudan, for example. And Mr. Trump was twisting the arms of these African leaders, trying to get them to act in a similar manner. Interestingly enough, this is a kind of turnabout for Mr. Trump to welcome leaders from West Africa to the White House in light of the fact that he otherwise refers to these as so-called S-hole nations. But another purpose of this particular gathering was to encircle the Sahel states, that is to say Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which are embarked on a program of true sovereignty and independence, including reclaiming the natural resources of their well-endowed nations. For example, Niger produces uranium, which helps to power electricity, and France, and until lately, was receiving a pittance for this valuable commodity. And I think that there is another aspect to this agenda as well, which is that Algeria, the northern neighbor of Mali, is in the crosshairs. Algeria has very complicated relations with this neighbor. Speaking of Morocco, those complicated relations stretch back decades. Morocco is in the good graces of the North Atlantic camp, which has led to diplomatic recognition of their gobbling up of Western Sahara, the former Spanish colony that Morocco invaded and seized post-1975 with the decline of fascism in the original colonial occupier. Speaking of Spain, Algeria has opposed adamantly this overthrow of Western Saharan sovereignty, but has been thwarted because France and Britain in particular have backed Morocco, not to mention the United States of America. And Algeria is under threat because they have negative relations with their former colonial occupier, speaking of France. They also have negative relations with the country that I keep mentioning that we need to pay more attention to. We're speaking of United Arab Emirates, which is intervening and interfering on a quite extraordinary level in African internal affairs. And it's interesting, whenever I talk to many groups about Africa, which I do on a regular basis, all they want to talk about is China and Africa, of course, which mirrors the State Department line. But if they really are interested in interference in the internal affairs of Africa, they really need to not only look at the traditional masters, so-called masters, so speaking of the North Atlantic countries, but they need to look at the United Arab Emirates, which of course also has been a pioneer in signing the so-called Abraham Accords, which involves forming relations with Israel, for example, something that Algeria has been adamantly opposed to at the United Nations. Algeria has been a stalwart supporter of Palestinian rights. And so, once again, if we're not able to stay the hand of the imperialists in terms of weakening and destabilizing Algeria, it obviously will redound ultimately to our own detriment, which of course brings us back to this mini summit aforementioned at the White House, where I'm afraid to say many of the African leaders did not acquit themselves well. A number of them spoke glowingly of Mr. Trump's golf game, of all things. Some of them spoke about how he should be nominated for the Nobel Prize, of all things. Nobel Prize for Peace, for example. This is after a bombing, dropping 30,000-pound bombs on Iran. And it contrasts sharply with how they might be treated in China, for example, because China, of course, has just reduced or, if not eliminated, tariffs on exports from Africa to People's Republic of China, where Mr. Trump is seeking to raise tariffs on every country on planet Earth, because we said before, the not-so-hidden agenda is to cut taxes on the billionaires in the United States of America and then make up for the shortfall by raising tariff revenue on not only African nations, but the European Union, on Mexico, on Canada, etc. Ultimately, I think that that particular strategy is going to backfire against U.S. imperialism. Already, you saw in London this past week the feting of President Macron by King Charles III and by Prime Minister Starmer. This comes a few years after then Prime Minister Liz Truss could not say for sure that France was an ally. And I think that what this bespeaks is that both France and the United Kingdom are quite concerned about the trajectory of the United States under Mr. Trump. And according to the Wall Street Journal, one of their interviewees says that France and Britain are decoupling from the United States without actually announcing that that's what they're doing. And to the extent that that's accurate, I think that we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. What I mean by that is that if France and Great Britain cannot be counted upon to be the absolute poodles of U.S. imperialism, and in fact, one of their announcements was that they were uniting their nuclear arsenal as a kind of collective response to the fact that U.S. imperialism has cast doubt on whether or not it would be concerned by some, I should say, fictional attack on Western Europe. But if they're decoupling from the United States of America, then they become much more of an independent actor and cannot necessarily be depended upon to follow U.S. imperialism, which means we have to take that into account in terms of making a global analysis. I would hope that the foreign ministries of these West African states who were entertained at the White House this past week would be paying attention to what I've just enunciated, but given the lavish flattery that they wielded with regard to Mr. Trump, somehow I have my doubts.
Dr. Horne, I wanted you to go back to talk about, Algeria and the role that they have played in terms of supporting African people in the diaspora. We know that Ahmed Ben Bella had a meeting with Dr. Martin Luther King. There's a great picture. If you go to Google Images, you can see a photograph of Ahmed Ben Bella and Dr. Martin Luther King. And then there is a glowing review by Dr. King. They asked Dr. King what he thought about Ahmed Ben Bella, and he gave Ben Bella a glowing review in terms of how much he knew about Africans in the United States. And also, I think the Black Panther Party had a office in Algeria, and I believe that Julia Wright, the daughter of Richard Wright, spent some time in Algeria, and also Boumediene, who was unfortunately participated in the overthrow of Ben Bella. He had a positive relationship with Africans in the Western Hemisphere. Could you talk about that?
Well, sure. I think it was Amilcar Cabral, the late founder of independent Guinea-Bissau. Of course, his legacy was stained when their leader turned up at the White House this past Wednesday, was famous for saying that Catholics flocked to the Vatican and Muslims to Mecca and revolutionaries to Algiers. And let me advert to a previous misunderstanding. I think, Molly, you're conflating two agenda items. One is Ujiri, and that's next to new book. Not that Ujiri written a new book.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That I have written a new book, The Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. And I think that this ties into the question of Algeria, because one of the things I try to illustrate in this book is how even enslaved Africans in the 19th century, despite the fact, needless to say, that there was no internet, given the fact that they were in the capital of the United States where you had diplomatic obligations, they tended to pay attention, oftentimes more attention to international affairs than some of our folks do today in 2025, when you have access to the internet. I mean, they paid attention to events in Europe, events in Africa, events in the hemisphere, for example, the Haitian Revolution, British abolitionism, the failed revolutions in Europe of 1848, the fact that during the US Civil War, Russia sent formidable fleets to both the Atlantic and the Pacific coast of the United States to bolster the Lincoln regime against revolt by enslavers, not to mention the fact that many of them were fleeing en masse north of the border to Ontario, to Toronto, to Canada, not to mention to Quebec. And so that sheds light upon this question of Algeria, which, as you suggested, was embraced in the infancy of its independence in 1962 by Martin Luther King Jr., and then continued to welcome leaders and cadre from the Black Panther Party throughout the tumultuous 1960s.
You are listening to Dr. Gerald Horne on Black Power 96. I hope I didn't cut you off, sir.
Go right ahead.
No, sir, I hope I didn't. I thought you were in the middle of a sentence, and I opened my big mouth. I thought.
Not at all.
Oh, okay. Do we want to talk about the Egyptian Ethiopian clash?
Well, this is very significant, very serious, and I'm happy to say that on Freedom Now KPFK Los Angeles in the next few weeks, we'll be interviewing a scholar of Egyptian history, which goes into some of the unfortunate details and history of this important Arab country, this important North African country, not to mention its bludgeoning of African nations to the south of Egypt. Egypt has a very unique history in the sense that it was colonized, particularly by the British at the end of the 19th century, but in turn, Egypt was becoming a colonizer, not least of Sudan. There was, in fact, the so-called Anglo-Egyptian condominium in the late 1890s. There was a joint colonial project by London and Cairo, which brings us to the conflict with Ethiopia, which, to be fair, stretches back centuries. And indeed, my second book of 2026 will probably open with an episode post-1865, post-U.S. Civil War, when Confederate, that is to say, leaders of the enslaving Confederate States of America, flee en masse to Cairo, including military leaders who then lead an invasion of Abyssinia, Ethiopia. Of course, fortunately, they're defeated. And the current issue concerns the Ethiopian's Grand Renaissance Dam about to open. It's going to transform not only Ethiopia in terms of producing electricity, but probably that entire sub-region. Egypt claims that it's threatening its lifeblood, speaking of the Nile River, but many of us do not take that claim seriously, although we do have to take seriously the fact that Egypt has been cuddling ever closer to Ethiopia's neighbor, speaking of Somalia, which could be wielded as a military threat against Ethiopia, which has so many internal problems. In fact, in talking to some of the folks who are planning to go to Addis Ababa, the capital, in September, we've been counseling them not to stray that far from the capital because of unrest, not that far distant from Addis Ababa. And one would not have to be a geopolitical strategist to suspect that Egypt might be stirring up unrest in Ethiopia. I should also mention the curious case of Egyptian Americans. I've noticed that there are those who hail from that part of Africa who value, perhaps ignorantly, the fact that they can be welcomed into the hallowed halls of whiteness, for example. I don't think that they recognize that that is basically, in the United States, a political declaration that in many ways does not necessarily win them friends within the Black community in particular, since we have an acute understanding that whiteness is not a neutral identity, which of course, it's a shame I have to say that, since those who are defined as white are notorious for inventing cockamamie ideas like identity politics, which they use to defame Black people and not realizing that whiteness is the highest form of identity politics, to use their phrase. And that would include the woman born as Dina Habib, now known as Dina Habib Powell McCormick, a leading light in the Republican Party. In fact, the spouse of the billionaire senator from Pennsylvania, speaking of Senator McCormick. And there are others of that ilk and of that category, which then brings me to how Egypt, which has multiple problems, confronting Israeli expansionism, warding off the attempt to expel Palestinians to their shores, not to mention this ongoing conflict with Ethiopia, they found the time to criticize Jada Pinkett Smith for producing a Netflix movie that portrays Cleopatra as being melanin rich. Not only that, they turned thumbs down on a tour by the actor-comedian Kevin Hart because he had made what were considered to be Afrocentric comments, and Afrocentrism is a bad word in higher levels of the elites of Cairo because it brings back what they would consider to be painful memories of millennia past when those who are now on the bottom rung of society, speaking of the Nubians and the darker skin, were on the highest levels of society. That's the kind of history they prefer to bury or ignore, I guess, because it brings back painful memories, and obviously it complicates their attempt to enter unscathed the hallowed halls of whiteness. But in any case, we're going to have to keep, once again, a close and careful eye on this ongoing conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt.
And I wanted to close by saying that I think people should go to Freedom Now and check out your interview with Gerald Early on baseball. We don't have a black baseball. We don't have enough time to deal with that. But I heard that in part of that interview, and it was quite intriguing. So once again, Freedom Now. He talked about Josephine Baker and Gerald Early, a great scholar, and check that out. Is there, I guess there's anything else you'd like to add, sir?
I think we've reached the end of the road.
All right, thank you very much. And I would like to thank Lisa Watson for keeping us on track and keeping everything sounding good today. And Melinda Francis, any parting words for the audience?
Yes, I just want to remind that we are fundraising all month, and if you haven't already, please go to your computer, type in blackpower96.org/T, and if you are on the phone, then please type in 1-888-979-2796, and if you are on the Cash App, Black Power 96.
And we will put that on Facebook and all the social media so you can continue contributing to Diasporic music and to Black Power 96.
And also, I just wanted to remind audience that we do have a brand new website. So if you go to diasporicmusic.com, you'll get all our links. You'll get the links to the station. You even can follow Gerald Horne's interviews, Norman's interviews, and we have a couple of spotlights that we do. So check it out and follow us. And we are also we're on Apple Podcast, and we're also on Spotify, and we're on YouTube and SoundCloud. So check us out. Check the site out.
And we'll get some support from activists. What is it? Activists.
Yeah, and also follow Activist News Network. The Horne Report is always on there, uploaded there as well. So many places you can connect with us now. So that's pretty exciting. And follow the show, follow the station.
And we'd like to thank Kwame Henry. So I don't want to cut you, but Kwame Henry supports us, gives us some support as well.
Yes, definitely. Kwame Henry and the All African Revolutionary Party is definitely supporting and helping us get onto the podcast. So give thanks to
We
him.
state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.